Asst.
Hello everyone, it's again a great pleasure to be back on Seedhi Baat, and this time our co-host is back with us. Hi Lovepreet, and we have a very interesting podcast today, and it's been something everybody has been asking me to talk about on our podcast, and so we have brought in a very special guest, Dr. Rahul Goel, who is a assistant professor at IIT Delhi in the Center for Transportation Engineering and Injury Prevention Center, which is one of the very few centers I'm aware of in the transport research area. And he's published quite a lot of papers, and um, a lot of work has been done by him on the on estimating a lot of creating a lot of estimates in the transportation area, and he's very passionate about cycling. And I thought we all used to ride on bicycles every day when we were kids and when we were in our universities. But when we come out of our universities or our campuses, it becomes a very difficult task to ride a bicycle. So it's a question that everybody has been pondering over, from policymakers to researchers to our common public. So in that regard, we thought we should talk about this. So Rahul, over to you. So why do you think cycling is important to talk about in India today?
Thank you, Pavan and Lapreet, for having me over. Um, so, look, the last census that was done in 2011, that was the first time when we got to know an idea about the countrywide how people travel to work. And when we look at that data, we found very interesting results. And one thing that came out was that cycling as a mode of transportation to work remains a major, has a major share. And in many cities, at least in North India, there are up to 30% of workers traveling to work using bicycles. So, uh, one may look at cycling as a fringe mode of transportation that many people are not using, but numbers tell us something else. So, so we know that, and I mean, we have done a lot of work in Delhi and many other cities, and we know that as far as low-income population is concerned, much of their transportation demand is served by cycling. So, and even in major cities, even in major metropolitan cities, cycling use remains significant. Also, across the income groups, uh, cycling is used by school children who not only go to school but also to go to tuitions and other places. So, cycling cycling remains very significant despite all the problems that we face.
I think I'll hand the floor over to Lovepreet now. Lovepreet, go ahead.
Yeah, so Rahul, it's interesting that you say that cycling is one of the major modes of transportation, especially for the working population, because, like you said, it might not be explicitly visible that way because maybe we don't have enough infrastructure in place or we don't have enough facilities in place to see cyclists around in the cities so often. And
Yeah.
with the growing ownership of private vehicles and a lot of focus on EVs and everybody wanting to have their own vehicles, with metro rail connectivity coming into the picture, most cities trying to build a lot of public transportation also. It just looks very all over the place because in this time we are also talking about private ownership. We're also talking about enhancing the public mode of transportation, especially metro rail, and we're also talking about most people using cycle as the major means of transportation. So how do you view all of this? Why does this all look so all over the place? How do you view the transportation modes in major cities? And where does cycling stand in this criteria?
All right. So that is a very comprehensive question. So, all right. The way we look at travel demand in cities is by looking at the distributions of how long people have to go to their destination. So This is think of a histogram, which is telling you what percentage of trips are how long. So 1 to 2 kilometers
Mm-hmm.
is 20%, 2 to 5 kilometers is 40%, things like this. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what mode of transportation people tend to use in a given city depends on that distribution. So when you
Mm-hmm.
have very very short trips that are maybe less than 1 kilometers, which is often the case when we go to grocery stores or to buy vegetables, those are the trips that people are more likely to cover by walking. And the
Mm-hmm.
longer your travel distance becomes, the likelihood that people will use a motorized mode of transportation that increases.
Sure.
So, so one very extreme example to make this very clear is metro trains. So
Mm-hmm.
metro trains, uh, because the metro stations are uh, not everywhere located in the city, they are few in number. It takes a lot of time for people to get to the metro station. And when you reach
Mm-hmm.
your metro stop on the other end, then you have to travel some more distance by walking or whatever to get to your destination.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
we know from our own data and from other literature that people would do that when their trips are very long. It makes the trouble of getting to metro station uh, worth the effort if your trip is very
Worth
very
it.
long.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Right.
for example, in
Mm.
Delhi, the average travel distance for metro trips is 20 kilometers. It's 20 kilometers.
Wow.
So this is a very long distance people are covering using metro. And
Correct.
what that means is that when we talk about metro trains, it will serve a very small proportion of the trips, which are very, very long,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
simply
All
because
right.
of the nature of, simply because of the design of the metro system.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So it attracts those trips. And then a lot, a large majority of trips in Indian cities are less than 5 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
So
Interesting.
that is one of the reasons why walking and cycling still remain popular, because your
Mm-hmm.
distance can be covered very easily. And of course,
Interesting.
with private vehicle ownership, this becomes slightly more complex because when people have their private modes of transportation like motorcycles and cars, they tend to cover almost all their trips by those modes of transportation.
Yeah.
Shorter trips are also covered by motorcycles or cars. Uh,
Correct.
so if we were looking at major cities, uh, or well, let's say we were looking at all cities in India, the types of motorized transportation you see being used in those cities depend on this trip distance distribution. So
Right.
how long
Sure.
people have to travel to get to places. So
Sure.
that changes how what kind of modes of transportation are used.
Right. Right. So
That
I
makes
have.
sense, Rahul.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
go
That's
ahead.
it. So.
This just makes me wonder another thing. I have been in living in various cities in the last, let's say, 10 years. And that's my personal observation. It could be different, I believe, in other cities. But my personal observation has been that I don't see enough things in place for a person who wants to walk or a person who wants to go cycling. Enough infrastructure in place. Like some parts of, I live in Bangalore right now. To reach my office, there are some paths where I feel it's very pedestrian friendly, might as well be able to walk. And this problem that you talked about, that metro stations not being accessible, you, as a normal human being, you would feel like, are jitna time I'll take to reach to the metro station, let it be. I'll just take out my scooty, I'll reach my office in that time. Why do I bother?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But there are certain parts in the city which have pedestrian friendly services. You can walk, you can actually see people cycling there. But those are very specific parts of the city where maybe there are institutions, where maybe there are major workplaces. Moment you move away from those parts of the city, you see things are all over the place. There are people cycling in the road where there are so many trucks, and I actually have been seeing scooties on footpaths. I mean, I don't know what to say on that, but it's so all over the place, and the infrastructure doesn't seem to be in place. What are your views on that? Do you think we have enough infrastructure for such transit modes? And is there a behavioral challenge also when it comes to, people wanting to use cycles, or people actually wanting to walk in an era when personal vehicle, having a private vehicle is a big deal for people?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, the way our transportation infrastructure looks like in cities and how unequally the quality of the infrastructure is distributed, it's a reflection of us as a society. We are very unequal when it comes to governance. We are very unequal when it comes to provision of different infrastructure, and that is reflected in cities all over the country. There are some parts of the city in Delhi, for example, that have very good walking infrastructure, very good cycling infrastructure also, and very good access to public transportation. But that is not true for other parts in the same city. And
Absolutely.
and it's an, it's it's interesting given that the reason that because we are so poor, a lot of people are what you would call captive users of cycling, captive users of public transportation. They would use, they would continue to cycle, continue to walk, continue to use public transportation simply because they have to, because
Hmm.
there's no other alternative for them. And
True.
and it's a very it's very interesting because what it does is that it makes it makes us look when we look at aggregate numbers, it makes us realize that there remains a lot of public transportation users in Indian cities. It's something to celebrate, of course, and the same thing can be said about cycling. However, if that usage is coming from people having no choice, then that's not a very good thing,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And what that means is that people, whenever they have a choice, they would it's logical for them to use their own private modes. Like
Yeah.
you can't force people to use public transportation when it's very inconvenient for them to walk to the station uh, if they already have an alternative. So that's how the transportation modes that are used in Indian cities and how they are used in different parts of it reflects the inequality in our society.
Hmm.
Right. Right.
So people who are using cycles on Indian roads, they are not doing out of choice. It's not very nice to cycle on the roads in Indian city. It's very unsafe.
Right. Right.
Exactly. Correct.
So that brings me to the next question of there are a lot of these projects that cities or urban uh, administration bring about, trying to talk about cycling lanes and a lot of these. No, no, they look appear fancy when we talk about it, and they say, especially in Hyderabad, they're planning, and even in Delhi, right outside the IIT, they posted a picture or a video of how the cycling network is. There's a bus lane in between, and all of it's all over the problem. So when we're designing these kind of things for cyclists to use and for cyclists to use all of this kind of infrastructure, what should be the starting point? Where do we start to build something that is effective for these people to drive or ride around in the city for work or any other purpose?
Okay, so I think so. Your answer is the short answer is the good measurement of the problem. That's what we need to do. That should be the starting point.
Hmm.
And all the problems that we see in our transportation planning and how provisions of different modes of transportation and infrastructure is done, the problems arise from what we measure. What we measure is on-road congestion, on-road speed, uh, and what it does is that it forces you to remain in status quo, because if you keep focusing on congestion on the street, your solution would be building a flyover, for example.
Standard.
So and yeah, exactly. So the the more systematic measurement of the problem will come from talking to people. So for example, uh, every large city should have uh, household surveys done on a regular basis. So household surveys are very useful because not only are you talking to people who are on the road, which is what you can do when you are on the road asking people, but you're also asking people who don't get to different places. So there is a lot of unmet demand in our society. We realized that when the zero ticket policy happened in Karnataka, a lot of people started using buses. We realized that when free bicycles were given to school children in Bihar and West Bengal, cycle usage went up uh, in those places. So we have a lot of unmet demand in our society, which is not focused at because we simply never talk to people.
Right.
So, this is a measurement problem. We don't have uh, surveys in place that could give us an idea about what is the real demand for people, and a more proper way to decide where we should have cycle tracks. What are the locations that should be prioritized? That should come from number one, what is the actual demand right now, and the number two, what is the acuity aspect of it. We have to first provide it. Uh, I mean, if we could provide cycle tracks, safe cycle infrastructure only on few roads in Delhi to start with, in a city to start with, that decision has to happen. That decision has to happen in the presence of some data. Yeah, I mean, I was just saying uh, that we need to focus on our data collection and the decisions to provide infrastructure in cities and where to provide it should be backed by the data,
Right.
and we often don't have that.
So I have a follow-up question. Since you have been working in this area of trying to collect data and try to estimate what could be the demand, what could be the number of trips, and the recent paper that you talked about did generate quite a lot of discussion. So what do you, how do you, I mean, what are the kind of methods or what is the aspect that you use to try to collect data? So one you said was talking to people who are using it or not using it. But beyond going beyond that, how do you, how have you taken up that effort?
All right, so there are two major uh, approaches to collecting data on transport.
Hmm.
One is that you regularly collect data on uh, traffic volumes in different parts of the city. So, and traffic volume also includes counting pedestrians, counting cyclists also. So not just vehicles on the road. And keeping a very good track on these volumes gives you a very good idea about the trajectory of uh, motor vehicle use, trajectory of cycling use. We have a very poor understanding in our cities of longitudinal changes in these modes. I mean, we know the other side that motor vehicle registrations have improved. We know their sales number and everything, but we have no similar numbers to quote when it comes to cycling or walking.
Right, right,
Simply because we just don't measure those things. So number one approach is that you measure on road usage of different modes of transportation. The other more systematic understanding comes from doing population representative household surveys. So these are called household travel surveys in the context of travel demand,
right,
where we go to the household and we ask people uh, in a questionnaire. It's called travel diary. Yeah. So this includes even asking small details like if they went 500 meters to go buy their groceries, everything.
right,
And these questionnaires can also be combined with asking questions about accessibility issues.
hmm,
Are you able to access schools? Are you able to access hospitals? Are you able to access your work? And what are the limitations? What are the difficulties you have in accessing all that? So asking these questions gives you much more systematic understanding at the city level what is going on, and it also gives you an idea about the unmet demand. There's a lot of transportation demand that remains unmet simply because people don't have transportation modes, or things are just too far away for them to access.
Right, right, right.
Sure.
So we lack such data collection.
That's a very important point in the context of cities, and when we plan all of the infrastructure, flyovers. I mean, I think, I mean, I don't want to offend my own citizens in Hyderabad, but I think it become a city whose name has to be changed, Flyover Abad. I mean, I don't know. It's just so blatantly being constructed everywhere that I sometimes wonder, where are we living in? Is it for motorists, or is it for cyclists, or for whom are we building these flyovers at the end of the day? So the
Yeah.
next question, Lakshmi, go
But
ahead.
Rahul, there is, yeah. So while you're talking about all this, I think a lot of listeners might also be interested in knowing that where do Yulu of the Bangalore and Yulus of other cities, such provisions, electric scooties that have started. We have electric chargers everywhere. Then we have these Yulus, which are more or less somewhere in the middle of a scooty and a cycle, whatever it is. So where does this means of transportation fall? And I mean, what category do we count this in? And how sustainable is this? As in, do you think it's a good step towards mobility in the city, or is it something that's complicating it even further?
Okay. So you would call them micro mobility modes if you want to classify them as a category, the Yulus and everything.
Mhm.
But for many Western countries, this was a very new concept,
Right.
that using having these micro mobility modes to for last mile connectivity to public transportation, for example.
Hmm.
And there, in that
Yeah.
context, they become very important. However, for Indian cities, we we have always had our micro mobility modes. So in terms of cycle rickshaws, now they are e-rickshaws. So much of our last mile connectivity, those very short trips that people need to make, those were already being catered to by these modes. And
Yeah.
I would call them micro mobility modes also. They are much smaller in
Sure.
size, and so what we are seeing in terms of Yulu and everything, it's a natural and logical progression towards micromobility, more personal micromobility. Uh, and the reason it is now starting to happen more and more is because there's a global resurgence of uh, electric mobility. So
Yeah.
there is a
Hmm.
growing industry in that direction. So, so we are going to see many more of them as long as there is state support for it. There will have
Right.
to be some
Yeah.
regulations and licensing, and there are a lot of issues around that. So as long as there is going to be state
Sure.
support,
Yeah.
we are going to see a growth of them. There is no doubt about it.
Sure.
And they
So
have an important place in transportation, no doubt about it.
noted, noted. So while like it's a great input that you give here, that it's like a progression of rickshaws and the earlier modes of transportation that we had. But even for those, again, the question again comes about how ready are we in a city to welcome something like a Yulu? Again, to see a Yulu on a highway or to see it amidst multiple trucks and huge cars raises questions about how safe is the person sitting on that Yulu, or how safe is the person. I mean, I remember getting into a lot of accidents on a cycle rickshaw in Delhi back in the day when they used to be like a big hype, because it has no place in that huge road where there's so ample cars and trucks and buses and whatnot. So
Yeah.
what's your take on that? While we continue to introduce these new means and go for this progression, do you think our cities are ready for it?
So look, the way many things work in India is that simply because our transport system is so dynamic, and there is a lot of uh, there's a lot of provision of public transportation in Indian cities and in India in general by private players.
Right.
So we see a lot of innovation uh, in our cities, and they are, of course, they are serving a demand. So, for example, how quickly cycle rickshaws in many cities got converted to e-rickshaws. That you see emergence of these new modes of transportation, uh, and what that happens is that the initial emergence happens in the absence of any regulations and licensing discussion.
Right.
and and then the state takes note of it that these modes of transportation have become popular, and now we need to think about how do we regulate them, about the licensing and everything. So similar thing is going to happen in case of the modes of transportation like Yulu. So what you need to do is that we need to we need to come up with the regulations around these modes, and those regulations will decide, for example, what will be the age uh, requirement for people to use these modes, what kind of roads
Sure.
should people be allowed to use these modes on, for example, not on highways. Uh, so those and and that is a nature of how transportation solutions are provided in India. Sadly, that they come from a very reactive approach. So we keep
Hmm.
reacting to the whatever new thing comes out, and of course, uh, if they gain enough popularity, then state has to take note of it. But this is not how it should
Sure.
happen. I mean, the modes of transportation that we want to have on our street should come from a strategic planning. We
Right.
should be very prepared for the batteries, how the repair is going to happen. Uh, you know, what are we going to do with the batteries when they are when when they're out of use? So environmental consideration, and uh, you know different modes of transportation should be covered in Motor Vehicle Act, Center Motor Vehicle Rules. So all those things have to be established, and
Sure.
that's how it should be. Like in a if we were talking about an ideal way of approaching transportation, but so this is the reason what you see right now is happening in a vacuum of regulation and licensing.
I think that is evidence from the case that people talked about Rapido, and then you have a Rapido bike, Ola bikes coming in, and then there is a regulation coming in, or a directive from the executive coming in that there is no such uh, system in the first place. So all of this is
Yeah,
very evident that we see daily. So on a final note, because we are almost running out of time, I think I have just a very quick question before I hand it over to Lavpreet. So when we talk about these lanes of cycling that we see in all the cities, almost every big city is now talking about it. But when we talk about the location, you had pointed out that we have to have a data-backed assessment as to where this can be. So my question would be, how does a common person react to these things? What has been your experience when you talk to people with cycles? What do they tell you about these kind of infrastructure?
I mean, look, uh, when we talk to cyclists in Delhi, we realize one thing, that they are extremely aware of safety. Uh, Many of them have been involved in road traffic crashes themselves, so nobody knows how to navigate safely on Indian roads on cycling better than them.
Right.
And we uh, we also hear from them the importance of uh, cycle tracks, safe cycle tracks. So there's, at least among the cyclists, those who are already using it, there's a lot of appreciation for those infrastructure provision. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Uh, and what is happening right now is that because the provision of cycle tracks is done in a piecemeal manner. So you provide some cycle tracks on this stretch of the road, and then you provide it somewhere else. There is no network, interconnected network, and uh, it makes it very difficult for a new user to think about using that mode, because they are very skeptical of using an infrastructure which they know will discontinue after some time on the road.
Right.
So, so and other thing we need to keep in mind is that uh, it's not just cycle tracks that is a solution for safe cycling in Indian cities. One solution is very simple: to make our streets safe. Period. So there should be the road should be designed in such a way that it discourages speeding of traffic. Wherever we cannot control it by design, there should be enforcement. We should do all we can to oppose building of flyovers. Flyovers are a huge problem because you have created an infrastructure of concrete, and once you have done that, then you have to keep building around it. So it's a so we have to oppose building of such infrastructure like very strongly because they just stay there. Uh, so we have to. I mean, so thinking of cycle infrastructure in isolation is also a problem because our roads, our streets should be safe for everyone,
Right.
and
Yeah.
people should perceive them as safely. Then only will they come out on the streets on their cycles, the new users.
Right.
But right now, it is not the case. So if you look at the death rate in our cities, which is basically total number of road deaths annually, expressed as per thousand per 100,000 people, those death rates are many times higher than what you have in European cities.
Yeah.
We need to take care of that. We need to address that problem.
Right. Right. Right.
So so, so, cycling in isolation is not going to solve the cycling safety problem.
There needs to be a
Absolutely.
factoring of all these elements, all modes of
Yes,
transport together. Right.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's it. Yeah.
That's a wonderful suggestion. Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful suggestion. It was so nice and enlightening to know about all these things that you talked about because usually it goes very unnoticed. And the fact that cycling is a preferred means of transportation, but we don't have enough to cater to that demand that's there is a huge question. And that was something unknown to a lot of people who might be hearing us right now as well. Anyway, to end, I would like to know, what do you think? What are your projections, or how do you think the city mobility in our country is going to pan out in the next 5 to 10 years? You have given a lot of suggestions. You talked about a lot of critical inputs that are to be kept in mind. What is your outlook towards this particular space
Well,
going
there are
forward?
two trajectories, right? One is the 70s. We did not have a lot of motorcycle in India. And starting 80s, when we were talking about liberalizing economy and all that, that's when we started focusing on setting up automobile industry for motorcycles.
Right.
And that
Okay.
changed our transportation system in a very big way. Uh, so 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 starting 80s is when we see a large growth in motorcycle usage. So I'm saying that the state decided to invest in a particular sector, which is automobile sector, and it had an unintended effect on transportation sector.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, what our future is going to look like, my answer is it's going to look like the way we want it to be. The state and the people can decide how we want to imagine our future, and if we have to lay the foundation for it today, so that we will see its results in the future. That what it means is that we need to start focusing on the infrastructure and other policy interventions today that that will lead to a transportation system that we want in the future. And
Correct.
it of course involves the changes in road infrastructure, safer walking and cycling infrastructure, public transportation infrastructure. But it also we also need to keep in mind that the electric mobility, a lot of its focus is on motorcycles and cars. We could use
Mm.
electric mobility also for cycles as e-cycles, and that would not happen just like that. That would happen with
Yeah.
state support for that industry, right? Incentives will have to be given to the industry for it to flourish. So yeah, I mean those are the two trajectories that can happen, right? One is we just focus on the status quo, and the other is that we sit down and decide what we want our future to look like.
Absolutely. I think that
And
gives a great insight into this space that we are talking about. And honestly, when we were beginning, I thought this was a very niche space to talk about, and maybe might not be of interest to a lot of people. But I see that this is some related to everybody's life because in everybody's home Mobility is a must. Everybody's going out for something or the other, and this is very important subject that you picked up, and you really gave some very good critical inputs on this. Thank you very much for that. You
And
were
Thank
saying
you.
something.
then I would also like to mention that to the viewers that Rahul has also written a very specific paper about the metro rail system in India, and everybody should be able to read that. We'll be dropping it in the link in the description below because it deserves a read. It's honestly a critical assessment of what is the metro rail system about and what are the
Yeah.
factors involved in developing a metro rail and what should be the reason, because we are seeing earlier it was metro rails everywhere, now it's Vande Bharat trains everywhere, and cities have been like, we are told that cities have been connected like anything, but within the city what is the connect happening? That's what we are taking off from here. And then we'll be planning another episode soon with Mr. Rahul on specific aspects of cycling or related to it, and we'll be more than happy to see you again, Rahul, back on the podcast soon. And on that note, I think this podcast is something that we were like very eager to do for quite some time, and now we've been finally able to do that. And it's out with all the viewers to assess and think about think twice about what they want to do when they want to use car or
Yeah.
bicycles or what is it about. So on that note, I
Yeah.
think we'll all catch up again in the next episode. Yeah, Rahul, do you have
Yeah.
anything to add in the last?
Any closing remarks that you want? Yeah. Any closing remarks that you would like to give, Rahul?
Just that I mean, one thing I want to say, one thing I've missed in the whole transportation discourse is lack of voice from different communities. I think I think for a fair and just transportation system to develop, we need communities to come out and voice their opinion,
Right.
and then only will there be some pushback to flyovers and metro rails and all those things. It's yeah, it's
Absolutely.
not going to happen without that.
And I think
That's awesome.
that was a very enlightening episode. Is only an understatement. It's more like telling people out there that there are much more, there's much more than what meets the eye when you talk about investing in just public transport. There's a lot of public transportation infrastructure and
Absolutely.
quite a lot of things. And we'll be talking about a
Yeah.
lot in the next coming episodes. And on that note, see you all in the next episode. Thank you.
Yes.